it can be fun watching a macro run, and it's sort of the screen flashes and you can see lots of numbers appearing and all the rest of it. But if a macro takes a long time, then it can be rather tedious. And if the macro is taking a long time, then it's possible they might be spending quite a lot of time doing some of the following things. So it might be recalculating. So if you're punching a value into a cell and the spreadsheet is big, it might be taking a long time to recalculate the spreadsheet, because it normally does that just as it does if you're working with a spreadsheet directly yourself. It can be spending time updating the screen, and it can be you can also cause the macro to pause if there's a warning message that pops up, which is perhaps unnecessary. You know, that sort of thing. Like, for instance, if you insert a cell and you want to move all the columns to the right or something, it says, "Are you sure you want to do this?" or something, and you don't want that to happen. So we can speed up macros by stopping these things happening. The other way of speeding up the macro is by looking at what the code is doing. I'll talk about that a little later. So to speed things up, we can stop it calculating every time it punches a value into a cell. We can stop it updating the screen all the time. If you do that, what will happen is that the screen will be it won't go blank, it will be exactly as it was when the macro starts to run, and it won't change until the macro is finished, and that saves a little bit of time. And as I said, you can also stop it messaging you with warnings or considering events, which is, for instance, an event is when you close a spreadsheet or if you go to another sheet. Excel has a little think about whether it needs to do something, and you can stop it bothering about that. So these are my gift to you, which are the lines which I put at the beginning and then again at the end of lots of the macros that I write to make sure they run as fast as possible. And I'll take you through what they do here. So this first one is display alerts. So that was what I was talking about when Excel wants to ask you whether it's really okay if you do something and you don't want it to do that. So you can kill that and stop it happening during your macro. Actually, one of the good examples I think is when you're saving a spreadsheet and you're saving it over a file that already exists. You always get an alert message which will pause the macro. You don't want to do that, you want it to keep on going. So I say to it, display alerts is false. Enable events is the same sort of thing what I was talking about a moment ago, where if you're changing sheets or opening a sheet or closing a workbook, whatever else it is, Excel just says, oh, actually, I've got to go and think about, is there something else that I know I should be doing here, which could be set on a different macro, and that, which we're not going to cover actually, but you can stop it doing that. Screen updating is a good way of keeping the macro going quite quickly. As the macro is running, it's changing things in the spreadsheet, which of course are being shown to you as the user most of the time. This is where it's all kind of flashing, everything looks great. But that takes time. If you do want to kind of save time running the macro, then you can turn that off. And as I was saying before, it'll just show the screen as it was before the macro ran until the macro is finished, and then it'll finally show the new spreadsheet as it's been adapted or updated. So that's quite a good thing to turn off, make things run quicker. And then we've got calc. So you've probably come across calculation in your normal use of Excel. So if you've got a big spreadsheet, you can go into File and Options, and you can turn the automatic calculation off. Then if you want to put in some data, you can hit F9, which will force the spreadsheet to calculate. So you can do the same kind of thing with VBA, and you need to make sure, just in the same way as when you're working with a spreadsheet, that you don't get yourself into a problem with all of that. And what I mean by that is, if you've turned off automatic calculation and then you've changed some things in the spreadsheet, and then the macro needs to go and see what the value is in a cell, which is a calculated value, then before it does that, you just need to go calculate, and it's the command is just calculate, and what it'll do is a bit like hitting F9. So that's okay, that works well. Then at the end of the macro, you need to write these 4 lines here, which resets all of those things back to as they were before. I'm going to keep talking about calculation though. If during running the macro crashes and you've turned automatic calculation off, then AutoCalc is going to stay off. For all the other things, display alerts, enable events, and screen updating, those are only things that are going to be turned off during the running of a macro, but once the macros come out, Excel switches them back on again because it knows the user couldn't possibly cope without those being on. But it knows that calculation is something that the user sometimes does switch off him or herself. So if you crash out of the macro when you've turned the calculation off, it's going to stay off. You probably want to go back into File and Options and turn it back on again. But also we were saying, well, we're going to turn it on again when we get to the end of the macro. Well, actually, what happens if the user had already switched off automatic calculation before running the macro? He's going to be annoyed, he or she is going to be annoyed when you turn it back on again at the end of the macro. So what we do actually is slightly more specific. You probably saw actually here. What I've done is I've got this variable here, which is calc setting. You can call it whatever you like. And calc setting says, right, application calculation, is that on or off? And it pushes it into that value there, that variable there. And when we get to the end of the macro, it says application calculation is calc setting. So if it was off here, then calc setting will have the value off, which is probably 0, because it's always a value. And then when we get back here, it'll leave it off, and if it's on, it'll turn it back on again. So that's quite smart. The short and long of it is though, just copy these into your spreadsheet, into your macros, and you'll be fine. If your code is still taking a long time, then and sometimes it can take so long you're just looking at the screen and nothing is happening, you might want to hit escape and think a little bit more about the logic. In my experience, what I've found that I've done is if I put loops within loops, that can take an awful long time. So you can imagine you're going down the code and you loop, you might loop, and then you get to out of that first loop, and then you come back here and you loop again. The second time around, you've got to go and loop, and then you've got to come down, you've got to loop, and then there may be a third loop outside that. And once you get to 4 loops, it's impossible. The code always takes an awful long time, like days. You can write a macro that would take the length of the universe to complete. So if you're not careful, so have a look at those loops, and the only thing you can do is try and work out a different way to do your logic. There's nothing I can tell you about that. It's just something to look out for.